Hi, I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition. It packed a punch. A spring storm swept through San Diego with flooding and headaches for drivers. Why San Diego saw more rain than any other part of Southern California.
And no survivors were found at the wreckage of a U.S. Marine helicopter in Nepal. I'm Peggy Pico with what we know about the mission of the 6 Camp Pendleton Marines aboard the downed helicopter and when the recovery effort will resume.
Folks who do have the luxury of a vehicle oftentimes feel locked in that vehicle because they don't have a real option to transit.
Imagine beating the bus to work on your own 2 feet. The challenges for public transportation in San Diego. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. The worst of our late season storm seems to be behind us after dropping close to 2 inches of rain in some areas and causing some flooding. KPBS reporter Jean Guerrero begins our coverage.
The flooding has prompted the San Diego Fire Rescue Department to send lifeguards to high-risk areas throughout the county.
We're in what's called an Alert 3, and it's our special river rescue deployment mode, which means we have lifeguards at high-hazard areas throughout the city.
Areas like Fashion Valley and San Ysidro's Tijuana River Valley saw heavy flooding today, and roads were treacherous. This morning, a semi jackknifed on the Interstate 15. There were nearly 200 car crashes between midnight last night and noon today. Highway Patrol says on a normal day, there are between 100 and 170 crashes. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
The storm marked the second wet spell in a week. Overnight, heavy rains flooded roads like this one in Point Loma. KPBS video journalist Katie Shulove shot this video. She says the water was nearly 2 feet deep. National Weather Service says several rain records were either broken or tied since last night. Now the flood threat has passed and the storm is moving east. We're looking at fair but cooler weekend weather. Sunshine returns to the beaches tomorrow, mostly in the 60s. Looking dry for the inland valleys as well, with temperatures in the 60s too. A mix of clouds and sun for the mountains, much cooler there. And warmer in the desert with temperatures in the 80s. The record rainfall today in San Diego was the result of a storm finally breaking through a stubborn barrier. KPBS reporter David Wagner explains the science behind the ridge.
It's known as the ridiculously resilient ridge. It's a high-pressure region along the west coast. And here you can see the effect it's having on incoming storms. This ridge has been pushing storms up and over California, and that's a major cause of the state's drought. Daniel Cahan of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in La Jolla studies this ridge, and he says this week's storm broke through only because the ridge happened to wear down at just the right time.
This is kind of like free money. We didn't expect much in the way of precipitation in May, and we'll, take everything we can get. It, by itself, is certainly not going to break the drought.
Cahan says the real test of the ridge's staying power rests on winter El Nino. The National Weather Service has predicted an 80% chance of El Nino persisting through the end of the year. David Wagner, KPBS News.
Our coverage on the late spring storm in San Diego continues on air at KPBS Radio and online at kpbs.org. Almost ready for the pomp and circumstance, rain postponed today's graduation ceremony at Cal State San Marcos. KPBS education reporter Matt Bowler tells us why breaking down educational barriers is becoming a Cougar tradition.
They were working as farm workers in the flower fields in Oceanside, and they used to live in, this is very personal, but they used to live in almost tiny houses made out of cardboard.
That's Carlos Rosas. He's talking about how his parents lived when his mother was pregnant with him. Now, he's the first in his family to graduate from college. Priscilla Brito is getting her bachelor's degree in sociology, but she too had a hard path to walk. At 16, her foster family pulled her out of school and put her to work taking care of the house.
The future that they wanted for me wasn't the future I wanted, so I needed to find a way out.
Brito saw a grim life not too far down the road.
They say once you turn 18, you kind of shut the door.
Brito, like Rosas, knew education was the best shot. CSU San Marcos president Karen Haynes says she hears similar stories from many of those graduating.
50% of our graduating students for now 3 years in a row are first in their families to get a 4-year degree.
Haynes says years ago, CSU San Marcos set out to recruit underserved students.
I looked forward to looking at this region and saying, if we do not do this, those students will be lost. A whole generation of students might be lost.
Ever since then, the entire university has been on a mission to attract and help students that statistics say may never graduate. Haynes says they aim to make education accessible for everyone.
There was such a gap between the Anglo students who are finishing high school at higher graduation rates and going to colleges and finishing than many other populations.
To close the gap, Rosa says going to college has to be what is expected.
For Latinos, I feel it's more of a, yeah, you can go to college, it's an option, but it's not kind of the way it should be.
Brito says sometimes we all just need a hand.
Most people just need some form of help.
Matt Bowler, KPBS News.
They're starting their final missions in Nepal. A Scripps medical team will be flying home soon. They flew out of San Diego earlier this month. The 4 nurses and mission team leader have treated more than 1,300 patients so far. President Obama expressing condolences after a Camp Pendleton-based helicopter was recovered today by rescuers.
Our prayers remain with the families of our Marines and 2 Nepalese soldiers now that the wreckage of their helicopter has been found in a remote part of Nepal.
The president spoke this morning at the National Peace Officers Memorial Service outside the U.S. Capitol. The chopper disappeared earlier this week and crashed. It was on a relief mission to help victims of a second major earthquake in Nepal in 3 weeks. Officials say it's unlikely there were any survivors. The recovery mission was called off due to extreme weather, but will resume tomorrow morning. Peggy Pico tells us more about the Camp Pendleton Marines that were aboard the chopper.
The 6 Marines aboard the Huey were from Light Attack Helicopter Squadron 469 based at Camp Pendleton. Military officials say helicopter wreckage was found near a small village in a dense forest of a rugged Nepal mountain region near China's border.
Craft was positively identified at approximately 1:50 p.m. today, 8 miles north of Sherikot in the Dolika region. The wreckage was found at approximately 11,000 feet in extremely dense forest and exceptionally rugged terrain.
Joining me with an update is San Diego Bureau Chief of the LA Times, Tony Perry. And Tony, the Marine Squadron and 2 Nepalese soldiers on the helicopter were part of a relief effort in Nepal. What can you tell us about that?
Well, of course, after the first earthquake, and of course there have been 2 earthquakes, the U.S. mounted with the Nepalese and with the Indians too, a effort to get food and shelter and medicine and water to some of these stranded villages that were hit very, very hard, and also to get some of the casualties who needed better help than they could give them on the site to get them out. That's what this squadron was doing. They were in the Philippines on a multinational training mission. Several Huey helicopters from that squadron from Camp Pendleton were there. When the earthquake occurred and when the U.S. Started to mount a relief effort, they were tasked to get to Nepal and to be part of it. And they had been running this mission for several days when last Tuesday they went missing. There was one last transmission that would seem to indicate a fuel problem, but no mayday and nothing after that. And so for 3 days there was an intensive search, U.S., Indian, Nepalese aircraft, and also the Nepalese Special Forces and a battalion-sized group of soldiers on the ground. They apparently were the ones who found the wreckage, twisted, burned up the side of a mountain a long way from any large city. So they knew they had something. The U.S. knew. They sent in what they called para-rescue specialists from the U.S. Air Force and an officer. And they confirmed that indeed it was the helicopter from Squadron 469. Now, identifying the bodies will take time.
Sure.
And the general's being real careful. He is saying it is unlikely that anyone survived.
And what is the protocol when it comes to when there is a death in a mission of Marines? What happens, and how long does that take to get that information out?
Can take a while, and each of the families, and they can be multiple families, by the way, mom and dad and a wife with kids, it can be multiple families. They will have Marines with them and at their beck and call immediately with the notification and in the traumatic days that will follow. Now, in terms of getting it out to the media, they will not release the names for at least 24 hours until everybody is notified. So sometimes it takes more than 24, 48, even 72 hours. It can take a while.
Well, we know about the pilot only because the family, his father, came forward, correct?
Indeed, and what has occurred, and don't forget, we've had 10 years of this in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many families, and they're free to do this, will go to their local media, answer some questions, and that occurred with the pilot, Captain Chris Norgren from Wichita, Kansas. His father talked briefly to a reporter from a television station there, and his football coach also spoke to the television station, said he was a wonderful young man, had played football, was passionate about the Marines, about spirituality, very intelligent. His family said that he had degrees, aerospace engineering and mathematics. He was quite a young man, and now we'll learn, in the coming days, we will learn about these other young men as well.
And let's talk about this Huey. You talked about it was actually moved to the area. It wasn't flown in. It was actually transported to the area. What can you tell us about these Hueys? Are they designed for this type of flying?
They're maneuverable. They're small. They're not as big as some of the others. They don't transport 30 troops or large armaments or anything like that, but they're small and they're maneuverable, and they can get in and out. And they're good, and they've served for a long time. They're maintained very, very carefully, but things do happen. We don't know. Weather, did that play a role? Did fog? Did icy winds? Was there a problem in the fuel tank? Was there, to be candid about it, was there an error by the pilot? That can happen too. Lots of reasons. There's going to be an extensive examination, and it will probably be weeks, if not months, before we get a definitive, and we may never get a definitive answer. New York Times did a story the other day about Navy pilots and said that sometimes, even when you look and investigate, you don't really know why they crashed.
Well, we will continue to follow this story. LA Times San Diego Bureau Chief Tony Perry, thank you so much.
The 21-year-old Boston Marathon bomber has been sentenced to die by lethal injection for the 2013 terror attack. The jury reached the decision today after more than 14 hours of deliberations over 3 days. Johar Tsarnaev was convicted last month of all 30 federal charges against him. 17 of those charges carried the possibility of the death penalty. The bombing killed 3 people and injured more than 260 others. PBS NewsHour will have more on the sentencing tonight at 7. We are paying more at the gas pump, with the cost of a gallon of regular nearing $4. Gas prices in the county are at the highest level since July, up 2 cents overnight to $3.97 a gallon. AAA blames production problems at a refinery for the increase. The average cost at the pump has gone up more than 86 cents in the past 29 days. San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer previewed his revised budget today. A few of his spending proposals include an off-leash dog park, more library materials, and increasing operating hours for every rec center in the city.
Under this plan, 36 rec centers across San Diego in every council district, from Rancho Bernardo to San Ysidro, will be open 15 more hours per week. That's 33% longer, a massive increase that will give families, children, and seniors greater access to community programs.
Faulconer's original proposal boosted hours for just the busiest rec centers. City Council will vote on the revised budget in June. Helping San Diego move, city leaders are in the middle of a balancing act between a revised transportation plan and goals to protect the environment. KPBS reporter Claire Trageser shows us the people who are caught in the middle.
Ya ves, un cambio. Eva Luna is in her City Heights apartment getting ready for work. She's a nanny for a family in Kensington, just 2.5 miles away. It's less than a 10-minute drive, but Luna doesn't have a car, so she leaves herself more than an hour to get to work.
On Thursdays, I have to take my son to school. I get farther from work, so it's 1.5 hours every Thursday morning.
Luna usually walks the full 2.5 miles because that's actually faster than taking the bus.
There's one here in this area that moves some blocks, but not in the direction I'm going. Sometimes it's very tiring to have to walk every day.
We don't have a network that is efficient, that can get us to places we want to go.
Monique Lopez works for the advocacy group Environmental Health Coalition. She loves San Diego's ambitious climate action plan. It calls for boosting public transit commuting from 10% to 25% in 20 years. But to get people to stop driving, she says we have to make other options easier.
Folks who do have the luxury of a vehicle oftentimes feel locked in that vehicle because they don't have a real option to transit.
Spending on roads, public transit, and bike lanes is decided by the San Diego Association of Governments, or SANDAG. The group just released a revised plan for how to spend $200 billion on transportation over the next 35 years. Lopez says it spends too much on freeways and roads.
As the regional transportation plan stands now, it's going to be very difficult for the city of San Diego to achieve its climate action plan goals.
SANDAG's transportation planning director, Mug Stoll, says the agency is always looking for ways to speed up the transit system.
That's what the new rapid that comes down the I-15 corridor is all about. That's what the new rapid through from San Diego State to downtown along El Cajon Boulevard and Park Boulevard are all about, is to try and increase the efficiency of the system, including frequencies of the buses.
They say that, hey, we're putting money into transit. But the way they're doing it is they are expanding freeways left and right. And they're throwing bus rapid transit on top of those expanded lanes. And then they're also throwing carpool on that, and then they're also throwing potentially fast track passes on that. That's problematic because that's not real transit benefits. That's an excuse to add more lanes.
A new rapid bus won't help Eva Luna.
Coming downtown.
Thank you. While the bus system has routes that can take her east to west, no bus would take her north in the direction she needs to go. So she can ride about a half mile down University Avenue, but then she's left walking. Stoll says SANDAG may spend more on public transit, but not right away.
As we move out into the later years of the plan, depending on how funding becomes available, we are proposing to provide more transit operations funds to be able to increase the frequency and the convenience of the existing major bus routes within the region as well.
That could still be 30 years away. In the meantime, Luna has different plans.
I'd like to have a car, but right now, because I'm so busy, I don't have time to teach myself to drive. And sometimes I can't get other jobs because transportation takes a lot longer.
If you were to shave off 5 minutes every day of a 5-day commute, you would gain 40 hours in 1 year. That's huge. And so what that could mean is a better quality of life for Eva and her family.
Lopez says targeting residents like Luna who don't have cars is an easy way for the city to boost its public transit numbers. If Luna gets a car, she'd be moving the numbers in the wrong direction. Claire Tregesser, KPBS News.
Despite our rain, the drought gets worse. We look at what the state is doing to minimize the damage, at what San Diegans are being asked to give up, and at big losses for California agriculture, including in San Diego. Join us for the KPBS Roundtable tonight at 8:30.
parenting styles under the microscope, there's a growing debate over how closely moms and dads should monitor their kids. Peggy Pico explores the idea of free-range parenting.
Police detained a 6- and 10-year-old in Maryland and referred the family to Child Protective Services because the parents allowed their children to walk about a mile by themselves to a playground. The parents say they believe in free-range parenting, which encourages a child's independence as opposed to helicopter-style parenting, where a child is nearly constantly monitored. Here to discuss parenting styles are my guest, child psychologist Darlene Sweetland, co-author of Teaching Kids to Think. Also with us is Jennifer Coburn, author of an op-ed in the UT about parenting and the book We'll Always Have Paris, a mother-daughter memoir. And Darlene, what is your just reaction as a psychologist to the Maryland incident?
You know, my first reaction is what a sign of the times that is. You know, when I was a kid growing up, we were all over the neighborhood. You know, it was come home when the streetlights are on. And now seeing young kids walking out on their own really scares people, and they feel like it is too much, that these kids may not be cared for. And that was my first reaction to that, without thinking about what the parents were considering, which is, did they think about whether or not those kids had the skills to be out on their own? Was their neighborhood safe enough? Were the parents conscientious about that? And in listening to the interviews with the parents, they considered all of those things. They considered whether or not they had the skills and the neighborhood was safe and that they had a plan of what to do in those scenarios.
Okay, and Jennifer, in your op-ed piece, you don't actually denounce free-range parenting, but you say it's not for you. How come it's not for you?
I am too nervous of a person. I can see the benefits of free-range parenting, and I think it's a great choice for some families, not for us. I am a Jewish New Yorker. I am hardwired for neurosis. This is not a choice for our family.
It's not a choice. Well, as a parent who you've admitted, I know a bit of hovering in your day, should the sight of a kid walking on their own in a residential neighborhood, as you mentioned, should this be alarming, or does it just matter on, where the neighborhood is?
I don't know if there really is a should. If I saw a 6- and a 10-year-old walking alone, I'd probably ask them if they needed some help. I certainly wouldn't call the police, and I certainly wouldn't brand their parents as irresponsible. I read the article about the Mitevs in Maryland, and seemed like they were very thoughtful and responsible about their parenting.
And blending this out a little bit, Darlene, what do you tell parents, or what would you tell parents who are concerned about their children's safety, which is one of the arguments? Oh, look, they could be abducted, they could be kidnapped. Is there much to substantiate that fear?
Well, the statistics show that the crime rates and child abduction have significantly safer now than it has been. Yet, one time in a million is too much for a lot of parents. And so there's a lot of gradients that parents can do. So if a parent isn't comfortable having their child walk to the park by themselves, then maybe they can do a little baby step to that. Maybe they can let their child play at the park and they go sit across from the park reading a magazine in the shade and let their kids, navigate all of those social circumstances at the time, or give them other opportunities, because so often kids aren't given the chance to be out there in the community, making decisions, solving problems, critical thinking, without being under the watchful eye of parents. But there's lots of baby steps that you can do for those parents who just don't want to let them out of their sight.
Right, and on the other end of this, though, what is the line between free-range parenting and encouraging independence and actual neglect, or actually, leaving your children alone for the weekend?
Definitely. Well, free-range parenting, the concept under that is considering the skill level of the child, the developmental level of the child, how much practice they may have had in a certain situation, how many times have the kids walked to the park, do they know what to do, can they cross streets, all of that. Those are all considered in free-range parenting, and making a considerate decision on whether or not it's appropriate for that child.
But there are laws that you cannot leave certain age children home alone or things like that.
Right, and that's the other part of that, which is in Maryland, in their county, there was a law that stated that kids could not be unsupervised at that age. And despite the fact whether or not parents disagree with that, there's still a law that that is there.
All right. So
we
we see the extremes on this.
Yes.
So Jennifer, do you see a downside in being a helicopter parent or an attached parent? We won't label here.
Do I see a downside?
Yeah.
I do. I do see a downside. My daughter will probably not enjoy some of the benefits and skills that free-range children do. However, those free-range children will probably not have some of the skills that my child has. So instead of pitting them against each other, my hope is that they'll help each other and learn from each other. We cannot produce a child who has everything, and I think in trying to do that, we're going to drive ourselves crazy as parents.
Such a discussion. We could go so long on this, but we are out of time. So Jennifer Coburn and Darlene Sweetland, thank you so much.
Thank you, Peggy.
Remembering the king of blues, B.B. King passed away in his sleep last night. One of his last performances in California was at Humphreys by the Bay last August. Condolences for the guitar legend have poured in, from President Obama to Snoop Dogg. Flowers were laid on his star today on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. King was 89. He won his first Grammy for The Thrill Is Gone, his landmark song. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Good night and have a great weekend.